Здравствуйте, and welcome to the Rushing to Conclusions podcast. We're a podcast started by Slavic immigrants who just want to share a piece of our world with the new world. We'll be talking about the Slavic youth experience in the US, so that means we'll be discussing everything from meat jelly to the challenges of taking in two cultures at once. Whatever the issue, we aim to have a conclusion, or a couple, so stick around, put on the tea kettle, and settle in as we rush off to our next conclusion.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about the religious context. One of the most important parts of our experience in our circles is religion. As with other customs, the older generation passed down their faith to the younger generation as well. And, one thing that really struck me odd is why the Slavic denominations here were different than the corresponding denominations in the U.S. Like the Slavic Baptists were different than the American Baptists, or the Slavic Pentecostals were different than the American Pentecostals, and all the corresponding denominations. So
that is an interesting question.
Yeah, and I think because of these differences, I can't be the only one that's noticed it. Oftentimes, this whole Slavic evangelical denominations kind of find themselves at a crossroads of identity. That's my term for it. I don't know. Anyway, so this is kind of a big conversation. I think what we're going to do is we're going to split in two parts. In this first part, we're going to talk about the context and our personal experience. And in the second part, we're going to talk about kind of the future outlook, the current state, and we'll do our first interview with somebody, with a cousin, your cousin, my cousin, your sibling, who works in a Slavic ministry in the U.S. So, one thing when you talk about religion and Christianity with the older generation, they always reference the Soviet Union, right? It's kind of like a big thing for them. It seems like that's where everything kind of goes back to. But I had the question, and we kind of were thinking about what came before the Soviet Union that brought us here, that gave us this whole Slavic evangelical scene, and that's the circle that we grew up in, and that's kind of our experience in America. So I'm glad that you asked, meaning I asked myself, and we asked ourselves. And so I have this like little research bullet points, 1,000 years in like 1 minute, about how we got to the Soviet Union, and then we'll talk about why our circles of immigrants came over. So get ready, buckle up, here we go.
So ready.
Okay, we're going to start at the way beginning. 50 to 60 AD, the Apostle Andrew comes to the place where there are, I guess they're called Scythians, they're barbarians, they're tribes in what was Ukraine now. He predicts that a great Christian city will be there. He spreads Christianity there. Today, there is a beautiful cathedral there, where allegedly on the spot where he overlooked the Dnipro River, which is a river that runs right through Ukraine. It's like a world-renowned heritage site now, so definitely go check it out. I'm on my way there. So then, like 800 years later, missionaries start going to that area. Two important people there were missionaries, Cyril and Methodius. They came to the Slav nations, and then a steady stream of missionaries continued to go there. And the big thing that happened there was they created an alphabet called the Cyrillic alphabet, so they could translate the Bible and all their spiritual writings. And they were like, why don't these people know how to worship and read in their own language? So that's what they did. And everything was cool. 100 years later, mass baptisms and Christianity really becomes the big deal in that area. Prince Vladimir makes it the official state religion. And my mom got to attend like the 1,000-year celebration of that event in Russia. She said it was super cool. There was a lot of people out and like just celebration and stuff. So things go cool, I guess things are fine. And then about 1642 to 1658, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, which is the state religion, he tries to reform the whole church, which people don't like, right? He starts to update the books. He starts to update the languages and the icons and all this stuff. And that creates a split, and people are like, well, we don't like this. So this patriarch, Patriarch Nikon, he was super into Greek philosophy, intellectualism, hung out with too many Western people, and people didn't like that. And he didn't like the Tsar telling the church what to do. So he was like, I am not going to have any of this. This is really a bad time to do all of this because it was 1654, which another fun thing happened, called the Great Plague of 1654, also known as the Black Death. So
fun times.
That's unfortunate. Yeah, it's kind of a real bummer in history if you follow along. And so Russians were not happy, and I guess from what I researched, the year 1666, just 2 years after that, they thought the apocalypse was going to happen. I don't know why. Maybe it's because of the plague. Maybe it's because the year ended with 666. I don't know. I don't know if that was a thing back then. So, and then later on, we kind of get. So after those reforms, different groups of people start showing up who are kind of dissent, and they don't agree with the state. So this is where I think we can start finding where the context for the Slavic evangelicals came from. There's a group that I found interesting called Striholniki. They're like from the 14th century. We don't know how they got their name. It was either like haircuts or like strichte, I guess. I don't know how to translate.
I mean, translates to cutting.
To
cutting,
cut.
yeah. To cut either. I don't know what they were cutting. Like it was either hair or sheep, like shearing sheep, not cutting them. But either way, I guess some of them got thrown off a bridge. There's like a famous painting of it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, not how you want to be remembered in history, but at least you have your mark there. From then later on, more people followed along. There were Molokane. They were kind of the next group who separated themselves from the official state church. I think they're kind of the closest thing to the Slavic evangelicals post Soviet Union that we can find. But there's a lot of interesting stuff that goes into that. There's also another group called Old Believers that they still were part of the Orthodox Church, but they just rejected all the reforms, so they went and started their own little church. So kind of not a super clean timeline, a lot of messy stuff going on before the Soviet Union, which I guess makes sense why there's not that much coherence when you talk about that. Like there's not, it's just not so clean cut. That's what really struck me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The history. I mean, all history is kind of like that. But and then the next big thing was that the Bolshevik Revolution happened, and after that, that's when the last Tsar was assassinated, and that's when we come to that era of the Soviet Union that our older generation parents and grandparents really reference and live through, and that's kind of the context for them, and that was a context which was hard for any faith to survive. So yeah, that was definitely, I don't know if that was a minute or not, but that's kind of all the legwork leading up to the Soviet Union.
That was a good 6 minutes.
Yeah,
I'd say that's pretty good for 1,000 years of history.
I know, there's just so much, and the more you look into it, it's just like I don't know.
The more you find, and the more kind of confusing it might get.
It is. People didn't like write things down like as much as I'd like them to have now. I don't know.
They were just trying to make it more fun for you to discover.
It's weird to think that like someday like people will be researching what we did. Hopefully.
Yeah.
I don't know.
If we get to that point.
Just think about that. What did you do today? Do you want someone to write a report about how you've been living your week? I don't know.
After the revolution and the Soviet Union began, in 1918, Lenin implemented the policy of separation of church and state, which greatly affected Christianity and religion in general. The Soviet Union was an atheist country, and they pushed atheism. So a lot of different persecution happened. Priests, monks, nuns were taken away and oftentimes executed.
So it seems like this wasn't particularly like all faiths suffered from this. Like it was just whatever religion whatever religion you adhere to, or whatever branch of Christianity you're in, one didn't get favored over the other.
Yeah. Thousands of churches were closed of all kinds of all denominations. And actually, I was researching and found out they sent out atheist missionaries to convert citizens in rural parts of the country, which is like so interesting to think about. You never hear atheist missionaries.
That's so weird. How did they? I'd love to know more about it. Did they have like atheist revival services? Did they do like a?
They wrote a lot of atheistic literature. I found out numbering a total of 800 million pages were distributed throughout the USSR. So they were pretty heavy on the atheism.
Yeah, I mean, no kidding. What did you have to do to be an atheist missionary? I just find that so fascinating. Like it's not like you just want to have such a drive to have other people not believe in something, not believe in a God that.
I feel like that'd be more challenging than actually trying to convert someone to some sort of religion. You're taking away people's faith and hope.
So to get a little more context of what it was like, I kind of asked my mom some questions because she grew up in the Soviet Union, as did your mom. Yeah. My mom was born in 1967, so she wasn't there the whole time, but she said it was... they were treated like second-class citizens. One interesting thing is whenever they mention the Soviet Union and persecution, oftentimes I hear them say that they were name-called Stunde. And I don't know if any of you out there, your parents say the same thing, but I hear it very often from my parents. And as I was researching, I found out that word is Stundist is derived from the German word Stunde, which means hour. So it references the practice of setting aside an hour for daily Bible study, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Like I find that interesting that's like used as an insult, and I guess kind of like a demeaning.
Yeah, like, oh, you do that, you study the Bible.
Well, so that's interesting because the name Molokane of that, like the group way back when, it was also used as a derogatory term. It just means milk drinker, and because those people drank milk during fasts, that's something they really did, and they kind of adopted it and were like, yeah, we do that. That's interesting that they use the same thing here in the post-Soviet Union, and they're like Bible study.
Yeah. She said that the government would come to the churches and tell the elders not to bring their children to church. And I know you have a story about how your mom was sneaking in to church.
Yes. So they, I guess at certain points they wouldn't allow like younger people to go to churches, and she had to actually sneak in, disguised as like an old lady. Her and her friends snuck into church, because there were guards that I guess were monitoring for young kids not to be influenced and not to be snuck in. So that whole concept of sneaking into church is rebellious. Yeah,
it's just now people sneak out of church, and back then, if you wanted to go to church as a child, you had to sneak into church.
And that's why I guess faith, and that kind of gives an insight into why faith was such a important part for them, and it's something they like really want to retain here, because you have to sneak into church. Like it was something taboo, and I think anytime something's so taboo, something so like forbidden, you naturally want to do it. I'm sure there's some aspect of thrill and excitement, but also it's a really hard thing. My mom had a lot of stories about things like that, where they'd be hanging out in youth group and whatever, and just the FBI, or not FBI, KGB agents would show up, and it's clear that somebody in the youth group was just like an informant, a spy, but you don't know who it is. You just have to keep doing your thing. I don't know what other stories Did your mom tell you, or did you ask her?
She said when she went to college that she was pulled aside by one of, her elder professors. I'm not sure exactly what their position was, but they said that she was the first Christian in her college to attend, and that she was not allowed to witness to anyone and not tell. They basically warned her not to tell anyone about Christianity, which I never do that, and it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, they make entire movies about professors telling kids not to profess their faith, but that was like a perfectly acceptable thing. You do not.
Well, you know what's strange too is my mom said they also viewed them as like second class citizens, but also as people who sort of had mental problems. Like they viewed Christians as people with mental disabilities because they believed in God, in deism, which like right away you just had that stigma attached to you, just being part of society and professing what you believe.
That's kind of crazy. It just strikes me so interesting because it's like two different worlds from what we know. We don't know what that's like. We can go to church freely and nobody thinks you're mentally disabled. Also, interestingly, in colleges, university students after 1964 were required to take a course called Fundamentals of Scientific Atheism. And they push a lot of anti-religious campaigns. So another interesting thing my mom told me was that at work, she would get spied on by her coworkers, like through the door. They would listen through the door to see if she was listening to the radio. And I guess that was to see if if you're a Christian, are you allowed to listen to the radio and watch movies or do certain things that, I guess they thought weren't Christian. So I found that interesting. I guess it wasn't exactly persecution, but more like people were curious to see how you would act. And maybe that's why now our parents, a lot of the time, just certain things aren't kind of looked down upon, because back then they knew that if they did certain things, then I guess they kind of kept themselves more apart from what unbelievers were doing.
That, when you go through things like that, I feel like it just kind of ingrains a certain survival instinct into you, right? It kind of ingrains a certain way of life, just a certain way of living into that doesn't really always go away. Kind of like when we were talking about before, the things that, our grandma lived through with rationing and things like that, that never truly goes away. Having lived through a time like that, I mean, you're always kind of thinking about when the next similar thing is going to happen. So do you think that's kind of the case here when they come to a country? And I guess this is a good spot to talk about how did those people get to come to the U.S. and when they did come, that didn't change, that instinct of sort of survival, or that instinct of being on your guard still very much was prevalent, still very much stayed, with them, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, because they spent majority of their time or of their life in that environment, and coming to a free country or with a lot of liberty doesn't really change your, what's set in stone in your head and what you're used to.
I think it also impacts how they treat other people, at least, or how they relate to other people here, because if they're coming in with this attitude of, okay, well, I can't share this with people who aren't Russian Slavic Christians because they're going to treat us a certain way, or they're not going to understand, even if they're not prejudiced, or they're not going to put us down for our faith, they're still not going to understand, therefore we can't relate, we shouldn't associate with these people. I think might even impact why they don't like American churches as much, or why they can't relate to Americans as much, even Christians in America.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting point, that it's hard to find camaraderie with someone who has had a bit of a different past. And I mean, American churches, churches in the West also came from a form of, I guess, persecution, but it's a little bit different. The story of evangelicals in America is not the story of evangelicals in Russia. Like, a lot of the evangelicals here did not get persecuted by the Soviet Union, and they don't understand what it's like. We don't understand fully what it's like to live in a society where if you believe in a God, you're considered to have, mental issues. I mean, that's just hard to communicate. Even as we're trying to communicate and tell that story, it's hard to really grasp what all that looks like in all those aspects. But that's a great point.
Yeah. And kind of moving on to once the Soviet Union fell apart, my mom said that because there was kind of other problems and other issues that emerged once the Soviet Union fell apart, like the economy falling apart and people trying to figure out a whole new, basically new country, new way of living, that there wasn't as much focus on Christians and religion. So there was more freedom to preach publicly. So I guess it kind of loosened up, but people still they didn't treat them as badly, but there was still a distinct line between believers and unbelievers. And as she was talking about that, I found it interesting that, here everyone is considered Christian because America's a Christian country, that people treat, each other, they're pretty respectful of each other's religions. But back there, it was more, emerging out of an atheist country, people didn't automatically become Christian.
What do they say? Like, religion, money, and in politics is something you don't talk about? Or like here in America, like everyone is entitled to have their opinion, and it's fine. We don't really care that much. But yeah, you're right. I mean, America, our parents' generation in America had a different experience than our parents' generation in Russia, with the whole how much of the government was down with their beliefs. Although to be fair, during that time, America also had its own problems in the evangelical Christian world. Primarily, you think about the whole civil rights thing and the civil rights movement in America, where you had some Christian pastors and some churches dealing with the issue of slavery, and some churches were saying like that's cool. So that's just not something that the Soviet Union people dealt with. So really, with all that going on, it's no surprise that like religious people didn't want to stick around the Soviet Union, and there were ways that were possible for people to come over to America.
Yeah, so one of the major things that made it possible was the Lautenberg Amendment in 1989, which was enacted by the United States. And it provided refugee status in the United States for nationals from the Soviet Union. And it basically declared that they are fleeing a well-founded fear of persecution.
Now, to know, at the time that our parents were coming over, the Soviet Union had already fallen apart. And they have already, they still lived as a different type of citizen. Like, they still had the social stigma with them, right? But they weren't actively like killed or so that this amendment, it's interesting. This amendment allowed them to come over, because that has happened to them, right? And maybe it will happen again, because I guess people didn't know at that point, right?
Yeah. So I think that's just one of the major legislation that kind of started the immigration. But yeah, most immigrants were evangelical Christians, and we were considered religious refugees. So the immigration was based on the religious persecution in the former Soviet Union. And a lot of immigrants were sponsored into the United States by churches here and resettlement agencies, and of course their family members that had previously immigrated. So for our family, we had our mom's sister, our aunt, was here, and their family was the ones who submitted documentation for us to be able to come over here. And I think we were sponsored by, was it the Diocese of?
Yeah, it was the Archdiocese of Portland, I believe.
Or was it here, because they had moved from Portland?
Well, they submitted, from what I understand, they submitted the paperwork to the Archdiocese in Portland, and then they decided to move. So the paperwork came over to Wisconsin at that point. I remember bits of the process. I remember I got to go on a train to Moscow for an interview. I didn't get interviewed, but I guess our parents did. And what type of interview did they do? Do you remember? Like, I guess I don't totally recall, but they had to make sure that these people were actually Christians. They weren't just trying to.
Yeah, my mom said that they would ask them questions about like what's in the Bible, and just to like make sure that they were, really real Christians, not just trying to, sneak their way into the States.
I wonder, like, there's got to be people who had no idea about what the Bible says, and just imagine,
they were probably so embarrassed.
Just imagine trying to BS your way through that. I mean,
and you were like, oh, well, my copy of the Bible says that. So,
yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Which version are you reading? Hold on. Let me, we're off by like 4 pages. Sorry, I don't.
Yeah, no, it's like the New King James Version, just like the really new one. It just came out, like copyright and stuff.
Just yesterday.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wonder what kind of questions they asked. Like, because who were these people that were interviewing? Did they have like a base knowledge of like the just Sunday school stuff, or
maybe they had like a pre-listed amount of questions to ask. But yeah, there was a lot that went into the process, and having to travel to a different city to go to an interview, and
this sheds light on the whole thing, because again, I don't know about you guys, but people always would ask me, as soon as they know that we're from a different country, they'd be like, so what brought you to America? Well, I'm glad you asked. And well, actually, no, I would never be glad that anyone asked.
Yeah, because I would never know what to say.
And so I would always just say things like, well, we had relatives over here, or well, had a business our relative started a business that was here, or something like that. I don't know, saying like religious persecution and socioeconomic struggle brought us over as refugees here. It just kind of kills the mood. It's a little bit of a bummer for the mood. But anyways, I think this kind of sheds more light on that question of what brought us to America. A less ambiguous answer, but a much longer one too.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to reflect on that, and to be able to give an answer to someone who asks, like, your story and how you got here.
Or you could just tell them that your parents were part of the Russian mob and were transferred here.
That's literally what...
Well, that's what they assume anyway.
Yeah, I think that's just an assumption that goes without saying. Dan, how much do you remember from the whole coming over here process? Because I know, how old were you?
I was 4, just about.
Do you remember a whole lot?
No, not too much, but I do remember the night before we left. Even though I had no idea what was going on, that we were even leaving, that I remember. I don't remember anyone telling me about anything. I just remember, for some reason, that night stuck in my head, even as a little kid, about people saying goodbye to me, being, like, treated special, like no one cares about some random 4-year-old, usually, but since I was leaving, everyone was like, oh, we're gonna miss you so much, and I just remember people saying bye to me. And I remember, this wasn't the night before, but I do remember going shopping for our little travel outfits, little suits that we got. I just remember...
I forgot about that.
Yeah, because, that type of culture, you're going to start a brand new life in a different country. You're not showing up in sweatpants for this, like, 24-hour flight. You know, you're showing up with your hair brushed and done and in a special outfit that you bought, little costumechick, that you bought to travel to your new life. And I remember wanting this, like, beautiful, like, brightly colored, you know, like, something a kid would love, just, like, floral suit. But my mom got us this, like, dark green with, like, gold trim, and I was like, this is boring. I look ugly right now.
I totally forgot about that until you mentioned it. I didn't even realize we bought those just for that occasion. And I wonder if we still have it. I know my mom keeps a lot of clothes for a while.
She does, but I asked a couple years ago about them, and she said she gave them away. I think she sent them back to Ukraine.
Oh, that's a clever way to bring more people over. Then they wear the traveling outfits. Ah, I see. That makes sense. I remember I had a little Adidas light blue-green tracksuit on, and I thought I was so fresh in it. I was like, going to a new country. Yeah, I'm gonna step
Adidas.
out fresh. I know. I love that. That's I don't even know where we got it from. Maybe it was just from
The bazaar.
The bazaar. Yeah. I don't know.
Market.
But, yeah, I remember the one. I remember a couple things from coming over. I remember, Diana, especially for you, where we didn't know English, but I guess a 4-year-old, you know, you were a pretty cute 4-year-old, so you kind of just got your way doing whatever you want.
I was adorable.
And
yes.
yeah, and the apple juice thing.
Oh.
You know what I'm talking about?
The apple juice thing. Yes. Okay. I don't know who it was. But, I was on this plane, you know, and I don't remember why or who this was for, but someone set me in the aisle and they told me how to say apple juice, and they pointed to some lady, which was the flight attendant, and they were like, go ask her for apple juice and just say.
I'm pretty sure it was my mom. I'm almost positive it is my mom. That she was like, just say, like, скажи просто apple juice. And you were like, got it.
Yeah. Okay, that is something that she would do. Because I just remember that.
It's
like,
always...
I would just walked up to her and I said, I don't know if she even understood me, just apple juice. And then I got it.
You got it.
I started.
They actually gave it to you. What the heck?
The best way to get stuff is to ask a little kid to do it for you.
Yeah, I bet you didn't even like apple juice when you were that young, did you?
I don't remember. Guys, I don't remember anything. I just remember, like, random snippets.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were so young, like, I was 7, which isn't that much older than 4.
No.
But, like, you remember memories, but I don't remember how I felt at all. I mean, I remember on the last night that we left, it was really sad, and when we were prayed over at church, I remember just crying my eyes out. But I was a kid, and it didn't seem, like, I don't have a memory of, like, feeling, like, a big shock or difference. It might just be because I was so young. So it's interesting to think about that, and how would it be if I was older, you know, if I was 13, 15, 17, and what that experience would have looked like if I was able to comprehend more, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point. I remember trying also not to cry during that getting prayed over thing, and I was definitely crying just because other people are crying, so it made me want to cry. It's just interesting how it's the younger you are, and so we developed a lot of our like understanding and relationship with church and with faith growing up here, but that's not, you know, from what we talked about, that's not how our parents developed their understanding of faith and what it takes to practice faith in the country they're from. So for next time, we're gonna kind of lead into talking about what that looks like for our generation of being here in America, but still under the very much influence of the old, like, the faith that was forged from the Soviet Union times, and that's how our parents still sometimes tend to see things. So that's kind of a preview for next time. And we're gonna do an interview with Stan, my cousin. I keep saying your cousin. My cousin and your brother. Someone who's actually working, kind of has ministry experience in that. So
yeah, I'm excited to talk about that and just what it looks like for our generation to balance. Well, actually, both generations, older generation and younger generation, and how to learn how to work together and pass on the faith.
Yeah. And I feel like just starting that discussion, whether, I don't know how many people have thought about it or not, or like how deeply people have thought about it, but the more you talk about it, the more you can understand not only yourself, but also, this community that has a lot of amazing qualities, as for like the church community, parents, and understanding them as well is so important to be able to relate to them more and to be able to troubleshoot any, areas where there's strain or conflict, and to be able to see where we're headed in the future and where we can like retain some of the most important and best qualities.
Yeah, keep the best things from the past and build on the best things from the future.
Exactly.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Just made that up on the spot.
That's a good way to conclude this episode. And
yeah,
the conclusion would be that learning the history of where you came from and your parents is really important to understand the context of where you're at now.
Yeah.
And so we'll continue that discussion in our next episode. And we appreciate everyone who is listening. And
if you actually made it this far, you're the real ones. You're the OGs.
OGs.
You know what? If you made it this far, the secret code is Matryoshka. If you comment Matryoshka to us, we'll know you made it this far, and maybe you'll get a special prize or something. I don't know. You're just gonna get a lot of gratitude.
Give you a shout out at least. At least a shout out. Yes, if anyone's made it this far, Matryoshka, comment it or DM it, and I'll make sure.
Yeah, we'll see it for sure.
Make sure you get taken care of. Anyways, until next time, those were our Kippah conclusions for this time, but we'll have more robust conclusions on the next one. So
absolutely.
All right.
Tune in next time.
Thanks for sticking around. And as always, and evermore, a pleasant ciao.
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 Ciao.